Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome all. Welcome all. I am again your host for this Let's Read session. My name is Pixel Broadside, otherwise known as Apinoy in Victoria. Welcome. Welcome to the continuation of this reading of Adele Wiseman's Sacrifice, which is part of the Northern Lights anthology for Canadian short story fiction. The previous session I stopped at page 17 of the original anthology, and we will continue on from there. We have seen our refugee family, or I guess in this case they're immigrants, settle in to their new home, and we shall now continue from there. So please sit down, relax, maybe brew yourself a nice warm cup of tea, and let us begin. Maybe they're whispering that we might want some water during the night. Isaac lay sleepy and thirsty, conjuring up this fanciful hope because he was ashamed to venture out of the room in his bathrobe among all those feminine voices that whispered in the kitchen. It seemed to him that he had not had any water for a long time. The taste of salt herring was in his mouth. He got up and brushed against the chair, making a noise so that the whispering in the kitchen held its breath for a moment. His father's deep, open-mouthed breathing continued to purr and chortle from the bed, and his mother lay silent, curled up against the bedclothes. Isaac found an orange to suck and laid back down on the couch with it. It was different when they had changed boats and were in England for a short while. There, it didn't matter that his clothes were different. He could walk with his hands in his pockets, knowing he'd be leaving soon, and pretend he was at worst, wealthy, idle, indolent, even perhaps at times a bit supercilious. He saw himself back in London when he had stood for a long time watching people buy bananas, wondering what was done with them. Yet he had not let on, just cocked his head carelessly to one side and whistled a short snatch of melody, as it were absent-mindedly, as though speculating on some subject far off from these petty transactions. At last a man and a little boy had bought some of the bananas, and the little boy peeled one of them and began to gobble greedily. So Isaac had bought and peeled to take, tentatively taste. Pleasant, floating in to confront his parents. Mother's gasp. What are you eating? Father. Raw! Isaac, enormously sophisticated, wearing no clothes at all, prowling a strange house with raw girls whispering, It's a fruit to gobble, greedily in English. Tasting, sipping, drinking deeply. Suddenly his brother's head crowding among the immigrants. Moses, like water. No, like herring. Jacob the learner, in darkened room, like watered herring. Definitely, definitively, like water. Moses the singer adamant, raw water. Can't get water from a torn bathrobe. Contemptuously. The orange didn't help much, ventured Isaac. She still wagged her yellow nose as Isaac slept. After lunch, when Isaac went to the English language course that had been organized in the district high school, Abraham left the house with him. Isaac pointed at objects, enunciating carefully in English names. Tree, sky, cloud, house, mountain. Abraham would repeat, fingering the syllables clumsily with his tongue, but with immense satisfaction listening to the sound of his son's apparently adroit mastery. When they parted, the young voice continued to repeat itself in his head, raised, clear, ardent, for to Abraham his son's voice must be ardent. Nothing grows but by desire. Sky, house. He stopped in front of a tree, frowning at it demandingly. Now what did he call this? His beard jutted out in vexation, and his eyes traveled up the trunk in search of a clue. Boim! Isaac's voice, speaking cheerfully in Yiddish, came to his mind. Boim, said Abraham out loud to the tree with satisfaction and proceeded towards the busy avenue. The little leaves are falling from the trees. Abraham expanded his scope, carefully enunciating his thought mentally, as though it were an elementary language lesson, thinking in Yiddish, but laboriously, so that he could feel pleasantly as though it were the English equivalent. He stopped as he reached the avenue and pulled out his little snappers to look for the address the butcher had given him that morning. Today I may find work. Then we will go to night school. It might be that there are new thoughts in English. The Russians, too, have very clever sayings. The chill autumn winds ruffled the hair on his face, outlined his bare cheeks, where they met his beard, and crept, clean-smelling, into his nostrils. Isaac will yet do something fine. He was not spared for nothing. He looked into the shop windows as he passed and checked the numbers above their doors. The butcher had said, looking at him in a sly way, Polsky might be needing a new man now that he's opened up again. His business is booming. The women can't resist nosing around now that he's back. You know how women are. Abraham had asked for and written down the address of this Polsky's shop. Quite a man, Polsky, the butcher had begun again, and when the women get hold of something like that, their tongues run ahead of them. Can't talk of anything else. Yes, agreed Abraham, who only half heard. You think perhaps that he might need someone. Never can tell. He's got a pretty big place there. Used to have someone to help him. And now that he's just back from his little holiday, as they say, and his mind probably isn't altogether on his work yet, well, he probably needs someone. The butcher chuckled wisely and winked. Only you'd better watch. It may be catching. How does your wife feel about that sort of thing? Abraham saw himself already on the way. Immediately after lunch he would go. It was no good to go with a hungry look. He thanked the butcher and left, leaving the man to look after him with some annoyance, the frustrating taste of an untold story on his lips. That's a strange man, that butcher, full of funny looks and hints. But maybe this man will really need me. Abraham paused before two large windows, aware that he was nervous and anxious. He looked about him at the preparations nature was making for winter. If I get to work, we will walk in the park this evening, he promised himself as he opened the door to the store. The large bell tinkled distantly in his ears. He closed the door behind him carefully. If not, we will walk in the park. He straightened up and walked through the sawdust to the counter, where the butcher was waiting on a customer. Standing a little to one side, his hands behind his back, he waited tensely till the man should be through. Isaac walked to school, studying signs and faces, learning the contours of the city, wondering what was to come for him. The city rose about him, planted on an undulating countryside that seemed to have spilled over from the ridge of dark hills in the western distance. The life that he remembered wavered uncertainly forward to meet the life that he seemed just about to live. In the morning he had wandered around the flats of the city, the crowded downhill area in which he lived. The flats scooped down toward the edge of the brown river with a sort of lilting quality, as though the earth had lifted a shoulder and the houses had slid close together, and the factories had slipped and jostled one another to the river bank. Westward above the flats, grand houses spread themselves, their rocky gardens and many trees prepared with an autumnal festival of color for the austerities of winter. Along the edge of the sharp incline which, like a small cliff, separated the heights from the flats, the streets lit up brightly at night and were crowded with people. In the day they were filled with traffic and the commerce of the city. Beyond the river to the east, and beyond the township and truck gardens that dotted its farther bank, was another gradual rise, which gathered breath for several miles and heaved up finally with a tremendous effort to a double-crested hill that dominated the eastern landscape. To Isaac, the land seemed like a great arrested movement, petrified in time, like his memories, and the city crawled about its surface in a counterpoint of life. He was aware of the hill to the east as he walked. When he didn't look at it, it seemed to crowd up closer, as though it were watching, absorbing every gesture in its static moment. He looked sideways and back toward it, and the mountain assumed its proper proportion, the sweeping double hump carelessly mantled in splotches of autumn color. The mountain reminded him of how he had asked the giggling daughters of his landlady the source of the lights that peered at night from behind its first hump. They had crowded close beside him at the window, Gertie and Goldie, the younger one right up against his side. The older one had held her finger to her ear, described a circle with it several times, then pointed to the lights. The younger whispered, "Crazy house," giggled, and shuddered fearfully closer to him. That was why it was called Mad Mountain, a strange name to call a mountain that looks so intimately on all the affairs of the city. Strange to think of the people that it had gathered up to live with itself. It was not a thing to laugh and giggle about, as these girls did. But with women it is always so, Isaac told himself sagely. What they said meant little. It was merely to draw your attention to other things that their eyes and lips could tell you. It was because of a girl that his brothers had discovered one night that he sometimes stayed awake and listened to them talking. How young he had been then! That night back in the old country returned to him now with a vividness that banished the warm immediacy of the sun and the keen smelling breeze from his senses. He had lain awake as he had intended, hoping to hear another argument about God, so that he could finish explaining to the incredulous Menashe Reutemann across the street why some great thinkers thought that maybe there couldn't be a God. He had forgotten, because of Menashe's interruptions and arguments, the lofty line of reasoning that Jacob had followed some nights before. Now he listened, puzzled, while his brothers crawled into their places on the huge stove behind him, no, beside him, and whispered about an ordinary girl. Minutely they debated whether the carpenter's daughter had really spent all afternoon picking flowers in her front yard solely because Moses himself had spent all afternoon walking back and forth past her house. "You say she was picking flowers for 2 whole hours?" asked Jacob, the thinker, man of reason. "She must have picked a good many flowers in that time," he continued thoughtfully. "And what would she do with all of them?" It followed, obviously, that the flowers were only an excuse. And what other reason could she have? "Do you really think so?" Moses had asked in such a pathetic voice that Isaac wanted to giggle. And Moses tried to remember out loud what kind of flowers and how many flowers she had picked, and whether that was all she had really been doing in the garden. He went carefully over the many times that he had wandered back and forth down the street, pretending to be immersed in thought, until the smell of hops from the brewery 2 blocks down, combined with his excitement, had nearly overcome him. He recalled that she had kept slightly turned towards the walk, that when he glanced her way he had caught her eye several times, lowering hastily to her work in the garden. Once, when he had passed, she had actually raised herself up and stretched, with one hand on the back of her hip and the other wiping across her lovely brow with fine black eyes. But even though her lips seemed to be smiling, she might just have been shading her eyes from the sun and not really looking at him. Thus reasoned Moses the singer, humbly, his voice filled with emotions that Isaac had never heard there before, except perhaps when he sang one of those love songs that his mother liked so much, feeling that the neighborhood women gathered around to hear. The desire to giggle surged up in Isaac again, and he stiffened against it. But Jacob was alert and serious in his brother's behalf. How could she have been shading her eyes from the sun? You said that it happened in the late afternoon. If it did, since her house is on the west side of the street, the sun would be behind her and shining toward you, so she couldn't have been shading them. She was just pretending. She must have been looking at you. The sun would be in your eyes. Do you remember if you had to squint when you looked at her? Squint, said Moses brokenly. I love her. Isaac snickered, choking over the piece of bed cover that he was stuffing into his mouth. There was a moment of utter silence, during which Isaac tried desperately to fall suddenly asleep. Then Moses pounced. Pest! You were listening! What did you hear? What did you hear, little devil? Isaac, though he was a little frightened, tried to sound innocent and injured and sleepy, with Moses breathing heavily over him. But the question itself seemed so silly that his voice broke on a quavering giggle. You like girls. Now, it was afterward, with another sun and a breeze that smelled of laying the old earth to sleep. How old had Moses been then? His own age, and it did not seem so silly now to want a girl to look at him. He thought, as he awoke to the pattern of stone high school steps that he was ascending, of what Jacob had said after he had rescued him from the lesson that Moses had begun to teach him. Wait, wait, little knacker, you'll grow up yet. Who would have dreamed then that they would not wait with him? Sometimes the very thought that it was he who still lived frightened him. It made him now, as the high school bell rang, rush into the classroom and, without even seeing the welcoming smile of his friend who sat beside him, sit down quickly and bury his mind in the grammar book. And that is it for tonight. That reading encompassed a little bit at the end of page 17 and around the middle of page 22 of the original anthology. So there it is. Thank you again for joining me tonight on this session. I hope you don't mind my reading of this part of the chapter. It wasn't perfect. I kind of struggled with some of the words in a bit, but otherwise, I've I'm having quite an experience. As like you, my viewers, I have not read through the anthology yet, so everything here is new for me as well. So we're discovering the story together, I guess. In any case, I will need to continue this another time. Hopefully next week. It's getting a little late. So thank you for joining me on this Let's Read session. If you liked what you heard, please leave a like and subscribe. Again, my name is Pixel Broadside, otherwise known as Pinoy Victoria. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon. You take care, and have a great evening.